A beam of early morning light illuminated a shadowy silhouette locked in a dungeon for us last time we played, starting off this zero preparation campaign of Knave. And with the help of a few die rolls, this beam of light turned a shadowy question mark into a persona with a history. Locked up in this dungeon of yet undeterminate affiliation is Torga, an orc. She has been exiled from her homeland for an act of mercy, and while she is merciful, it is part of her character to also be quite rude in engaging with a directness that others often find offensive. We suspect that the incarceration of Torga has happened as a token of good faith, a gesture of favor to the orc rulership who want her back from exile because back home things have changed. What we don't really know is what has changed and what the impetus is now for this envoy to come up and drag her back home, or at least try to. So that is what we are going to prioritize finding out today. Hello friends, Anderson here. Welcome back to Knave, episode 2, where we get to the seed of our adventure, the heart of the matter that is at hand, where we are already sort of in the middle of the action, understanding both who our character is, but also what situation she's in, and probably having to deal with that situation fairly immediately as the guard and the envoy are about to arrive at Torga's prison cell and about to reveal why all of this is happening. But first, we would like to know one more thing about Torga that is yet a blank on our character sheet, and that is her age. And as we have determined everything randomly so far, we will also determine the age randomly. I have taken the liberty of just looking up the age determination of a trained fighter in the Pathfinder 1E system, which is 14 plus 2d6. Why Pathfinder 1E? Why not? I just happened to have the book open, so I looked there. It has a random table. I like random tables. So let's roll 2d6 and find out Torga's age. A 5 and a 4 makes a 9 plus 14. That makes a 23. So, in orc terms, probably somewhat seasoned. Probably, as we understand, the maturity is a bit earlier there. Already at the age where an expectation of marriage would have been long past. But presumably the exile got in the way, or perhaps marriage is either one of the reasons why she was exiled or one of the reasons why she might be invited back. I have in the meantime also filled out our defenses, which is simply our attribute modifiers added to a 10. This is how it works in Knave. This is the passive saving throw mechanism where we use our defenses to resolve various situations where we're not necessarily the active participant. And in general, we resolve skill checks with a simple system where the DC is always 15. So we try to beat 15 every time, rolling 1d20, adding our bonus, our ability bonus down here. We can also roll with it a little bit more, adding or subtracting some from that roll as we see fit. We can also add advantage or disadvantage, meaning we roll 2 die 20 against 15 if we have advantage due to a favorable situation or due to being particularly skilled. We will take the highest of the two results, and if we have disadvantage, we take the lowest of the two results. Now, as for the situation at hand, we have an envoy coming who seemed not particularly favorably inclined towards Torga, so presumably this isn't all about forgiveness and goodwill. This is about usefulness and political opportunity that brings Torga back, or wants to bring Torga back. The question is, will she find a way to get out of this predicament? We have determined her gear, we have determined her weapon. We know that it is stashed away in a traveling chest that the envoy has taken possession of. from the guard. So if we manage to somehow overpower the envoy and presumably whoever the envoy's escort is that tries to bring us back to the land of the orcs, however far away that may be, however that journey might play out. Is it a ship? Is it by road? We don't know. All of that remains to be seen. In any case, if we manage to get into that chest and win our freedom, then our knavery can resume, where we are a desperate traveler or something of the sort, enjoying their freedom, or we can go along with it and not find an opportunity and perhaps be eventually given our gear. But in that case, we find ourselves locked in a social situation that we might not particularly be very fond of. Now, how do we find out more? We have, as usual, with this kind of zero prep surrounded by books approach, a number of options, and the first option is to like the video, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Yes, all of those, thank you very much. But also to just surrounded by random tables as we are, we can draw from one, the most logical choice being the Lonely Knave, which I think is also the one we're going to start with, since that's what the series is called. So I am going to roll the action subject how oracle here, which I will use die 20, die 8 and die 6 for, so we can resolve the means of our return, or rather the reason for our return. So let's see how the dice tie together a story here and what they try to tell us. We are getting a 12 on the die 20 and 2 5s. That is agree, misfortune, jealously. What I'm sort of getting from that is that agree misfortune, we are looking at the actor that isn't Torga. We are looking at whoever agreed to bring Torga back to the Orc lands, but it is to their misfortune. And they're doing so jealously, perhaps because Torga has always been the favorite one, and now events conspire that make it so that she has to even now be brought back, even though finally she's been punished. Finally the golden child, or the favorite one, has fallen out of favor, has been exiled, but now events have conspired in a misfortunate way to force an agreement of this Orcland actor to have her come back home, and looking at this with jealousy. So we can infer from this, I think, an NPC that is sort of our rival, who is perhaps kind of a political animal and puts aside the personal differences and personal misgivings about Torga, because who she is or what she represents is useful to them. Does that already tell us enough about what actually happened? I don't think so, but it gives us a starting point to develop at least one additional person in this world. So I am going to mark that down here in our campaign notebook, which I have printed out, unfortunately, because it's currently not shipping to the EU where I'm located. This is a product put out by Perplexing Ruins. I can only recommend you look into the Fallen RPG and this campaign notebook, both fantastic products. Again, if you want to lend your support in the scene, there is a Patreon for Perplexing Ruins. So if you want to chip in there, go ahead and do that, because this is quite excellent. It can on the fly help you generating some dungeons. It has some random tables attached to it and a lot of just structural means to allow you to note down your campaign and particular events in your campaign, important NPCs, threads, rumors, so you can keep track of your campaign, and some encounter tables out here as well for dungeons, settlements, and wilderness. So we're going to make use of this all as well at some point, but for now we are going to take heed of one notable NPC. We already know they're an orc, so we can as well reference an orc naming table, which means it is once again time for Xanathar, our old friend and compatriot, with lots and lots of naming tables that I rather like and use quite often. That's a percentage roll, and as usual in my campaigns as of now, I roll a die 6 alongside 2C, 1 to 3 female identifying, 4 to 6 male identifying. Here we go. That is male 39, that is Karg. Okay, so Karg is our... I don't know yet. I'm getting a sense it could be a brother. Karg is definitely an orc. And I'm marking him down as jealous and influential because those are two traits we already discovered from this setup now. I would certainly like to know more. So let's see if closed questions can help us a little bit here, because there are now two scenarios that we can steer towards when it comes to the intention behind returning Torga back home. One, which would maybe be a bit too convenient, is if Torga just has some kind of a rank and title waiting for her, because while I could think of reasons to explain the reluctance to come back, I would also think that once you are back and once you are forced back in position, you're also kind of forced into a more powerful position, which in my opinion for this knave type game, I would like to have a bit more adversity, a bit less personal power here, and I would have to be struggling a bit more. So the other alternative I could think of that might also be part of the reason why Torga really doesn't want to go back is that she has a claim that she herself, due to some maybe patriarchal aspect of orc society, cannot fulfill, but whoever marries her can. So that the misfortune that jealous Karg here feels is to bring her back and have her near again, where he'd rather not see her every day, but he's also sort of gleefully cackling because he knows he can put one over her by forcing her into a political marriage or something of the sort. So I would like to give the latter option a bit of a likelihood, meaning I'm going to ask the closed question oracle with advantage skewed towards, is she to be wed? And we'll find out whether that is maybe the driving force behind this whole incarceration and handing back over. Highest is a 17, which makes it a yes, so we know that to be true now, and it also feels a bit more right than stepping into some kind of a government office. Does that already tell us a bit more about orc society? I think so. We know that we were at least able to make some kind of decision that got us exiled, so I'm assuming women can at least be equals on the battlefield, but I guess that maybe the role definition there is a bit more rigid, where I'm picturing sort of a patriarchal leader, but one who is obliged to listen to the wise women, but those are all like of an advanced age and widows and things like, so sort of like the Dothraki, really. That's, I think, where I'm taking this from. So maybe we have a situation sort of advanced Mongol culture, pre-Chinese dynasty takeover, where it's already somewhat imperial and the Khan is a big deal, but equal to the Mongol Empire, where you had characters like Kamish and Zork-Ktani, I think, is that there'll always be influential female figures as well, but this is usually tied to age, so somebody like Torga would be very much just an addendum that lends credence to some male sub-Khan or younger brother of somebody, or whatever the plan is here, which she clearly doesn't want. And she also seems to be the personality type that could very well lead on her own, because she's very charismatic. We can also infer sort of an honor understanding that doesn't necessarily condone mercy, because we suspect that her mercifulness is part of the reason she was exiled. So that gives us a sort of a settled horde kind of culture with a rigid sense of honor, where it is patriarchally governed, but generally with sort of an equal direct influence, indirect influence, where the female advisors also pull the strings very much in the background, and the emperor or Khan can't just go against them. It's probably all very family driven, where the matriarchs rule the family and the Khan rules the empire. That also tells us that there is an empire, which also probably tells us that's why the local government here wants to placate said empire and agrees to pick up this wandering knave and lock her in the dungeon until this emissary comes forth. So that, I think, is at least enough to have that initial meeting. So let's get to it. The guard and the emissary, a snide-looking man with a bald, shaved head, a human man, incidentally, because this kind of duty, this kind of diplomatic outreach duty is not one that orc men or women undertake. This is not honorable, so they let the positions be filled by members of ancestries that are subjected to the Orc Empire, but aren't part of the Orc people. And drawing another parallel from this Mongol angle, from this horde, settled horde angle, there is also maybe an additional component where the orcs are reluctant to trust these humans in these functions, and they make them pay a certain price. A price they also ask for because they are not keen to embrace half-orcs, unless maybe it is half-orcs where the orc is the father, as a sort of token of virility, or even more perversely, kind of a sign of strength, really. I'll just leave it here. But where a half-orc from a union where the orc is the mother is very much frowned upon, and thus these emissaries, these diplomats, for their pure focus on their political role and function, and to take away any sense of a goal to strive for that the orcs understand, which is to strengthen the clan, strengthen the family, these emissaries are eunuchs. Why is this important? Well, thinking about it now, thinking about Torga's character as a rude person, the first thing she will say to them is putting the finger in the wound that she knows is one that, for the majority of this kind of emissary, cuts quite deep. And so as this finely red-robed with a blue shawl, bald, lean figure with this snide facial expression steps up next to the rather gruff and coarse and portly guard, she just looks him up and down with an expression of disgust and uses that gravelly voice and that intimidating demeanor, simply welcoming him with the word gelding. And I think we'll just roll a charisma check here to see if that influences the situation somehow to her advantage. If she manages to get under the emissary's skin by using a slur on him and perhaps getting him to needle. We're assuming this represents a start of her needling him constantly to perhaps down the line get him to make a mistake. So we'll see how this goes. We're rolling with a +6 because we are quite charismatic in an intimidating fashion, and we're trying to beat 15. We beat it by quite a margin, so we assume that even though this emissary is used to this, even though it is his role to not show emotion, something about the tone, something about the disgust shown by Torga, something in that whole combination of who she is and perhaps also his own reluctance to bring her back because she has gone against the code or whatever we want to call it, makes him flinch, which in turn makes Torga's corner of the mouth curl upwards just a tiny fraction.
It's your lucky day, bitch, and mine. You get to go home, and I get to be rid of yous.
The guard rattles his keys, and the emissary just lays a hand out, not really wanting Torga to just be set free without being on the receiving end of some instructory remarks on his part. So he recomposes himself, fusses with his shawl, and addresses her formally. It is my duty to inform you that you are to be brought back to the homeland in full pardon of your past misdeeds, where you are to be wed as befits a woman of your station. And Torga doesn't really miss a beat and continues in her confrontational manner because she is not particularly interested in having any kind of civil exchange with this emissary of her disliked relative or ruler.
And are you to be my husband, gelding?
again, sort of doing her best to make this go off on the worst possible foot. And in the meantime, we maybe want to determine what this orc kingdom, empire, whatever we want to call it, is actually named. I'm just going to take the ultimate toolbox here because there's a bunch of names in here that we can use. I think the realm names macro is an interesting one that has some things in here that could work very well with what we've already established. So let's roll on this one, roll a die 20 and see what the orc lands are called. 10, the Iron States of Murikan. Okay. Wow, there's even a Khan in there. That's nice. So is the Murikan perhaps the ruler here, or is Murikan the land and it just means everything that is governed by the Khan? I think maybe the latter. So the Iron States of Murikan. I'm adding this to Karg as his affiliation. And now to think, because obviously Torga isn't wanting to go along with this, but clearly there's also no real escape trajectory for her here. She knows that she is in a place that she cannot easily fight her way out of. We assume that this corridor is the only way out of this cell complex. We assume Torga knows there are more guards out there. We assume there's an entourage that the emissary has brought along, and so Torga is mainly creating a bit of a stink while at the same time having no other choice than to not get violent here. And so understanding this, the emissary doesn't grace her with a response. He just takes the hand of the wrist of the jailer, who unlocks the gate. The iron bars swing open, and Torga hesitates a moment, just stands there, not making any sign of compliance.
Oh, get moving or I'm gonna charge you rent.
And whether it's the invitation of the jailer or just the moment passing, Torga steps out and passes the emissary, passes the jailer, who is taken aback a little, but she, with her charisma, she kind of commands that moment of hesitation where you just kind of subject yourself to her immediately. So she walks first, and the emissary takes a few steps to not let her get away with this, and inserts himself next to her at least, as the jailer trails behind, and they exit the prison. Which leads us to the next set of closed questions, I think, because we don't really know where we are yet. We know we are somewhere where we were picked up, as the orcs have put out the call that Torga is to be seized so she can be returned home. Is this, however, a city? Is this a country barony? Is this in the borderlands to the orcs, or is it really far away? That is something we still need to determine now, because this might also be the place where we can now escape, potentially. And whether we're in a city, whether we're out in the open country, that makes a difference. So let's just ask the question, are we in a city? 13, yes, but. Now, the question is that but favorable for us or favorable for the other side? The but generally tones it down a bit on the closed questions, so this could be a sign that this is a city, but not a very powerful one. That could be in our advantage. So technically speaking, this city does not have much of a standing garrison. The city is strained for resources, perhaps quite a poor city, which is also why they don't dare contradict the orcs and why they maybe accommodate Karg's bounty, because they need the payout. So yes, it's a city, but it's quite a rundown one that is maybe a bit isolated, maybe part of a very small duchy or independent kind of a realm here. Let's give the city a name. We have 2 city naming tables, so I'm just gonna roll a d6 alongside the die 20. 1 to 3 is the first, 4 to 6 is the second. 5 is the second table, and 5 is Port Deep water. Well, that is convenient. That already answered another question, because then we also infer the means of transportation. We assume this is quite distant from the orc lands, from the iron states of Mirakan, but there is a port and we are to set sail on a ship sponsored by the Khan, and that's putting a bit of a spin on the situation, because then we either manage to escape now or we'll be out on the open sea for a while, which limits our options a little bit. So we'll note it under settlements here as Port Deepwater. Let's maybe get a sense of Port Deepwater, because we also have some more descriptors for cities here in the Ultimate Toolbox, which I've yet to use to that effect. So I'd like to actually give ourselves a glimpse of the city description. There is a detailed city description, which is, say, not infinitely reusable, but there's also a basic city description which you can kind of play with as it's more of a rough sketch. But we want detail right now just to get a more immediate setting the scene vibe from it. That's a 20. The walls of the city square it off around a major crossroads between lands. The market district dominates the center of town at the crossroads, where the keep is also located. Surrounding it are the districts for guards, residential, slums, military, and theater. So, revising the yes, but a little bit, it is not, in fact, a small or unimportant place. It is perhaps more of a weak place that gets by as a neutral ground sort of thing, where the trade routes congregate, but also the port. So this Port Deepwater is an axis around which commerce and trade in this world rotate, and it tries to play all sides equally. And it really doesn't have a standing military. It has the guards, and they're all relatively corrupt, so there isn't much of a strong arm of the law, so that point still stands. It is small in the sense of local authority, but it is vast and corrupt and bustling, and there is folk from everywhere here, and that also maybe tells me we weren't necessarily seized here. We were perhaps found somewhere else as we were knaving about by bounty hunters, and then brought here, turned over to the local authority for a bounty that they had put out, knowing of Karg's call to action. And then once they had possession of Torga, they informed the orc authorities, which also explains why we're in such a disheveled and sunken state in our physicality, because while the authorities here in Port Deepwater have treated Torga quite well, the bounty hunters really didn't. So they didn't give her a lot of food. They kind of bound her, and since she's also quite physically dangerous and intimidating, they didn't take chances. They just had her stashed away in a small compartment for the entirety of the journey. She spent some time here in Port Deepwater now, but she's maybe also disoriented, doesn't even really know where she is. And now that the double doors to the dungeons fly open and that first real direct daylight hits her, and she averts her eyes, and her hands no longer bound, actually puts an elbow up and sees that city laid bare before her, perhaps the keep on a hill incline overlooking the bustling market where everything comes together from all of the continents of this world. And she understands that she is in Port Deepwater, which is probably the first non-orc place that she hit when she started her exile. So she just snorts a derisive exhalation of sarcastic amusement that her journey starts and ends here as an exile. But she also immediately, her eyes darting around, taking note of the guards patrolling the rising walls of the keep, and keeping an eye out for any way to disappear in a crowd, but the crowd is too far away, and instead there is a litter sat down on the courtyard with several local hired carriers by these carrying rails, and a company of obvious mercenary hirelings standing in front of and behind, with about a half a dozen fighters each, clad in a variety of mismatched armor, but all wearing the same emblazoned tabard over it. Multiple different ancestries there, stocky dwarves, towering hillmen, whatever that is. I'm just spitballing here. The lithe figure of an elf equally in exile, and their faces barely visible as they all have a cloth mask in front of their face, only leaving room for the eyes under their helmets. And the emissary strides towards the litter, expecting Torga to follow and holding the door open for her. And there, maybe on the back of the litter, on this little extension, sits that traveling chest that Torga immediately clocks, thinking, that looks a little out of place. That's probably where they put my stuff. So next question. Is there a moment here where we still have a chance to do something in the city, or are they carrying us to the ship immediately? So as a clear question, do we still spend some time in the city on land before being loaded on the ship? Yes or no? 10. That is a shake-up. That's interesting, and quite interestingly timed as well. So a shake-up is a plot twist that pivots on the question we just asked. Opportunity to increase the stakes of the story or force a change of plan. So a change of plan. Well, the plan should have been from the perspective of our emissary here to get her on board right away, because there is no point risking her escape, and she's a lot harder to control if they spend a night in an inn. It's also kind of a question of, presumably he would make sure that she gets out of jail once they're ready to travel. I was just thinking, like, is there maybe a few hours of delay? But now I'm thinking perhaps the ship's unable to leave town. I think that's what we're getting here. There is another person in the litter, which perhaps seats 4, 2 forward-facing, 2 backward-facing, and the presence of the person is just revealed by a rustling of a curtain as the emissary holding the door open all of a sudden has his attention captured by a voice from within, and a hushed, whispered conversation ensues as Torga steps closer. Let's have her make a wisdom check, which she isn't great at, which also covers sort of perception-based things, just to see how much of that conversation we can glean and make sense of. Perhaps even the conversation isn't necessarily in a language that Torga speaks very well. It's like a human language that she has a passing knowledge of. So we roll. Wow, okay. She gets the gist of it. So what could happen here? What could cause a delay? Well, to stick with a fairly classic theme of fantasy and Star Wars, trade negotiations gone awry, and a third-party kingdom unaware of the time-sensitive prisoner being transported by sea has decided to blockade the port of Deepwater. So there is now a blockade that drew up overnight that is making it impossible for the ship to leave, and then the emissary now has to make a decision. Are they staying in the port indefinitely? Or is there maybe an option, a riskier option, to travel over land? Because they do have the escort, he does have the funds, he might have to renegotiate a contract with this mercenary company, but it raises all sorts of questions, like, is it even politically viable? Are there hostile nations that won't let them pass, or do they have to travel clandestinely then? I think it's less likely that they choose to go over land, even though the emissary is probably terrified of Torga escaping, but unlikely doesn't mean impossible, so we're gonna roll this with an unlikely component, roll twice and take the lowest result. So is the emissary now considering the notion of traveling over land? 20 and 16. Wow. Okay. So clear yes. And with the 20, a yes and, but we take the lower. So that's just a yes. The emissary's facial expression hardens on seeing the whisper. And the guard is already turning around as the emissary snaps his fingers and holds out an apologetic, placating gesture towards Torga that is sort of a token of respect afforded to station rather than person, and addresses the guard. A moment yet, good man. If I could implore you to see to it that no harm comes to our honored guest. And there he looks to Torga, implying keep an eye on her and make sure she doesn't run away while I take care of some business. And before the guard even has a chance to protest, already goes towards the head of the column and starts conferring with the elf, I think. I get the sense that this is maybe an unusual arrangement where an elf is a mercenary, and in this case we make it even more unusual and make them the mercenary captain. And since that is probably an important NPC, we are just going to give them a little bit of an outline. Again, using Xanatars and establishing name and gender. 44 and a 3. Ilanis. I think we have that name in use already in the city of Coleraine, so once I start recording that series at some point, might get potentially confusing if this character becomes important. But be that as it may, we have Ilanis as a mercenary captain. And now we have a situation where Torga is not quite sure what to make of this, knows something's up, doesn't really know quite what. She has caught the fact of the blockade from that hushed conversation, so she knows that the sea path is sealed off, and that gets her hopes up. And now that the emissary is immediately jumping to some other course of action, she is frowning because she maybe underestimated him a little, looking down as she does on the diplomatic corps of the eunuchs. And she regards this conversation between Ilanis and the emissary as not good news for her, because she initially thought, well, okay, I'm gonna have a chance to do something here in Deepwater, maybe even has some contacts here or something, but now it seems like there is an immediate plan B put into action, which she does not favor. So, how far we've come now. We understand a bit more about Orc society. We know where we are. We know Port Deepwater exists. We know Karg is there. We know the emissary is with us for a while. We know Ilanis leads the company that will escort us out of the city. And all of this just by the magic of dice conjuring this stuff out of a bunch of random tables. This is why I really like rolling this up on the fly as we go and not making any plans. This could still become a Orc political campaign. This could become a campaign set in the Orc lands. This could lead to us escaping in Deepwater. This could be an overland journey where we are confined to a litter trying to find a way out of there. We'll see, and we'll see next time. So thank you very much for watching. I'll catch you then, and bye for now.